Dead Horse Bay sits at the western edge of a marshland that once had more than 2 dozen horse rendering plants, fish oil factories, and garbage incinerators. From the 1850s until the 1930s, the carcasses of dead horses and other animals from New York City streets were used to manufacture glue, fertilizer, and other products at the site. The chopped up boiled bones were later dumped into the water nearby. The squalid bay, then accessible only by boat, was reviled for the putrid fumes that stank overhead. As the demand for products made with horse parts declined and automobiles replaced horses as viable transportation with the city, the bay turned into a dumping ground for rubbish. The bay is rarely used for anything now, as trash washes up on the shore from time to time. It can be easily reached by foot travel. North Brother Island were uninhabited until 1885, when Riverside Hospital moved there from Blackwell's Island, now known as Roosevelt Island. Riverside Hospital was founded in the 1850s as the smallpox hospital to treat and isolate victims of that disease. Its mission eventually expanded to other curtainable diseases. The island was the site of the wreck of the General Slocum, a steamship which burned on June 15, 1904. Over 1,000 people died either from the fire on board the ship or from drowning before the ship was beached on the island's shores. Mary Mallon, also known as Typhoid Mary, was confined to the island for over 2 decades until she died there in 1938. The hospital closed shortly thereafter. Following World War II, the island housed war veterans who were students at local colleges, along with their families. After the nationwide housing shortage abated, the island was once again abandoned until the 1950s when a center opened to treat adolescent drug addicts. The facility claimed to be the first to offer treatment, rehabilitation, and education facilities to young drug offenders. Heroin addicts were confined to this island and locked in a room until they were clean. Many of them believed they were being held against their will. By the early 1960s, widespread staff corruption and patient recidivism forced the facility to close. Now a bird sanctuary, the island is currently abandoned and off limits to the public. The city is in discussion to possibly reopen the whole island or in part to the public once more. South Brother Island. The adjoining island, South Brother Island, is just 7 acres in size and once was the summer home of an early owner of the New York Yankees baseball team. Once the home burned down in 1909, it was never used much since then. Decades later, the island was bought by the city and turned into a wild bird preserve. It's off limits to the public. Only environmental workers and volunteers have access to the island a few days of the year. Hart Island, the largest publicly funded cemetery in the world, with approximately 850,000 bodies buried here. Hart Island is located just east of City Island and is technically considered part of the Bronx. It once served as a prisoner of war camp and also housed a prison and women's asylum. Burials here began taking place during the American Civil War, and these days, since the island is operated by the Department of Corrections, mass burials are carried out by Rikers Island inmates. Those buried on Hart Island could either not afford the expenses of private funerals or were unclaimed by relatives. Approximately 50% of the bodies buried here are children under 5 who are identified and died in New York City hospitals. The public needs permission to visit this island, even for family members of people who are buried on the island. The Kings Parks Psychiatric Center was established in 1885 by Kings County in nearby Suffolk County prior to the consolidation of Kings County with Queens, Manhattan, Staten Island, and the Bronx to form modern New York City. The official name of the hospital in its first 10 years was the Kings County Asylum. taken from the name of the county that Brooklyn occupied. The hospital was revolutionary at the time in the sense that it was a departure from the asylums of folklore, which were overcrowded places where gross human rights abuses often occurred. The asylum built by Brooklyn to alleviate overcrowding in its own asylums was Farm Colony Asylum, where patients worked in a variety of farm related activities such as feeding livestock and growing food, as this was considered to be a form of therapy. Eventually, the Kings County Asylum began to suffer from the very thing that it attempted to relieve, overcrowding. New York City responded to the problem in 1895 when control of the asylum passed into state hands, and it was subsequently renamed the Kings Park State Hospital. Post World War II, patient populations at Kings Park and the other Long Island asylums increased markedly. In 1954, the patient census at Kings Park topped 9,303, but would began a steady decline afterwards. By the time Kings Park reached its peak patient population, the old West End relaxation philosophy surrounding farming had been succeeded by more invasive techniques of prefrontal lobotomies and electric shock therapy. However, those methods were soon abandoned after 1955, following the introduction of Lurozine, the first widely used drug in the treatment of mental illness. As medication made it possible for patients to live normal lives outside of a mental institution, the need for large facilities such as Kings Park diminished, and the patient population began to decrease. In response to the declining patient population, the New York State Office of Mental Health developed plans to close Kings Park as well as another Long Island asylum, the Central Islip Psychiatric Center, in the early 1990s. The few remaining patients from Kings Park and Central Islip were transferred to Pilgrim, ending Kings Park's 111-year run.